Face the choice between what is right and what is easy.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, innies, outies, and of course in-betweeners, welcome to this video. Well, most of you, if not all of you, have already heard of the Health Protection Coronavirus Restrictions Regulations 2020. The ones you see on the screen are for England only. Well, it turns out that on the 21st of April, it's the 25th today, on the 21st of April, some amendments were made to that act. And guess what? Nobody was notified. I'll say nobody was notified. What I mean by that is there was apparently no parliamentary involvement with the changes, although the Secretary of State has made the following regulations in exercise of the power conferred by sections blah 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 blah. It appears that this was not put before Parliament in order to put this through. Now, how true that is, I do not know at this time, but that is what the information available is suggesting. Now, as you can see, there's only a few notes in here, or a few contents within this amendment regulations. Now, we don't need to worry about the introductory text or the citation and commencement. This is where we need to look at, okay? Amendment of the Health Protection Coronavirus Restrictions England Regulations 2020. Now here, there is not a lot of changes, okay? Not a lot of changes, but there is one that is rather important to notice, and that is this, in Regulation 6. Now, if we head over to Regulation 6, Restrictions on Movement, Paragraph 1, Regulation 6, Paragraph 1, after leave, insert or be outside of. Okay, Paragraph 1, during an emergency period, no person may leave or be outside of the place where they are living without reasonable excuse. Now this, guys, gives the police an immense amount of power to abuse, because all of this is based on the police constable's perception at the time, okay? Reasonable is subjective. What's reasonable to you may not be reasonable to a constable who didn't get laid that morning. And that's going to cause you and me and everybody listening to this and watching this video huge amounts of problems. We've already seen countless abuses of this new legislation, and adding this or be outside of the place where you are living or they are living without reasonable excuse further extends the capability for abuse. What's been said is that Home Office lawyers are basically passing off extensions of the criminal law as clarification. So what apparently they're doing is they've so-called rushed the initial Health Protection Coronavirus Restrictions England Regulations 2020, and with these amendments all they're doing is tidying up some loose ends, which is to clarify. But clearly it's not clarifying, it's adding to it. It's not a clarification, otherwise they would have said that in the first one. This is an addition, an amendment, and this is a huge issue. This is something that we all need to be aware of, okay? So it's not just about leaving your property without having a reasonable excuse, it's about being outside of your property without having a reasonable excuse. Now, this is not legal advice, this is an opinion based on what I know. So it's entirely down to you to do your own research and only do what you are comfortable with based upon your own opinions and your own understanding of this legislation. However, we've already been told kind of what things would be deemed as reasonable. Going for exercise, going to the shop for essentials. Bearing in mind, if you're an alcoholic, then wine or beer is essential. Going to provide care for somebody. You know, exercise, although the police are trying to suggest that exercise must be something like walking or running, exercise can be any number of things. Now, I personally, if I get stopped, which I haven't yet, But if I get stopped, I will not speak a single word. Not a single word. Marie Denou, who got arrested by British Transport Police a couple of weeks ago, she got put into a police cell and she was taken to court the next day, and she remained silent the entire time. So, 24 hours of not speaking to anybody. And that was the best thing she could have done. Because when she got into court, the court asking her details, asking her to clarify her name, etc., and she refused to respond. She didn't say, "I'm not giving it to you." She just kept completely quiet. The court were unable to determine whether she was fit to stand in court and be judged by them. When they did eventually remove her from the court and went ahead with the case without her there, they fined her, which turned out to be wrong. It was illegal. Shouldn't have done it. Couldn't have done it, but they did it. Being quiet is your best defence. The police have to establish what a reasonable excuse is. It's not down to you to tell them what your reasonable excuse is. It's down to them whether they think your excuse is reasonable. And this whole using the word excuse is a problem as well, because an excuse would intimate that you have already done something wrong, and it should be something like legitimate reason. For example, during the emergency period, no person may leave or be outside of the place where they live without a legitimate reason. A legitimate reason is going to the bank, going to the shop, going to provide care, going for a medical, these kind of things. They're legitimate reasons. They're not excuses, because you're not doing anything wrong by being outside of your property. The police only really have the power to disperse groups of more than 2 people. Even then, the groups really need to be in groups that are not 2 meters apart. So you could, and I've said this before, you could get 100 people go to the park. In fact, 100 people likely do go to some parks. Now, that's just because they're not there together doesn't mean that they're not a group. If you're standing outside of a shop in a line, it's a group of people waiting to go in. Providing you're 2 meters apart and there's only 2 of you within that 2 meter space, so to speak, there's very little that the police can actually do, although they will try and do something about it. However, again, your best defence is to say absolutely nothing. Do not say to them, "I'm going to the shop," because they'll say, "What are you going to get?" And they will find a reason to make your excuse unreasonable. If you say you're going for exercise, again, they are trained to find problems in what you say. They are trained to find offences where there are none. And so with this addition, to leave your place where you are living or to be outside of the place where you are living is absolutely disgusting, and is just there literally now to give the police more control over people. And yet the majority of people are doing what they've been asked. It's almost like they're now adding things to this to make it more draconian, even though people are generally doing what they've been asked to do. I'm beginning to wonder just where this is going to end. But this change and some of the other changes, which don't really matter to the normal Joe public, so to speak, some of the other changes are to do with people who own and run and operate burial grounds, crematoriums and things like that. But this is the main change that we need to be concerned about, is that they think now that if you're outside of the place where you live without reasonable excuse, then they can do something about it. But again, best form of defence is to say absolutely nothing. If you are given a fine, you don't have to sign anything, okay? You don't have to agree to anything. You don't have to speak. See, the thing is, they can't actually give you a fine, thinking about it this way, unless they can prove that you are being unreasonable, which if you don't say anything, they can't prove that you're being outside is an unreasonable act. Therefore, they can't give you a fine. They can only give you a fine, okay, if you give them a reason to give you a fine, and that is by talking to them. You do not have to give them any details. Not giving your details when it comes to a fine is an offence. You can be arrested if you don't give your details once they've said they're going to give you a fine. but they cannot say to you, I want your details because I'm going to give you a fine. Okay? They can't say, I want your details because I'm going to give you a fine, or I want your details or I'll give you a fine. That is illegal use of the legislation. They can only request your details once they have determined that they are in a position to give you a fine, and not before. So keeping your mouth closed makes them deciding your reasonableness for being outside very, very difficult. And then if they do get a fine and you do have to give your details, if you want to, you don't have to, they can't keep you any longer than 24 hours in the cell. But if you do give your details, contest the fine. Do not bend over, do not accept it. Anyway, I thought it was important to let you know the change to the Health Protection Coronavirus Restrictions England Regulations 2020. In fact, we're going to see if there is a change in the Scotland, Wales and other ones. So what have we got here? Yes, we've got Wales. We have two for Scotland and nothing for Ireland. So let's have a look at the Wales one. The health protection coronavirus restrictions are amended as follows in Regulation 4.3. Further restrictions and closures during the emergency period for 1 in the first place it occurs, substitute 2 in regulation. So that doesn't say anything there about being outside of your home. Scotland doesn't say anything there about being outside of your home. We'll have to have a proper in-depth look at that. But in the England one it does. So there you go. Scotland and Wales have not incorporated, by the looks of it, the amendment to section 6. It seems that it's only the England one that has that amendment. So be warned, folks. Again, your best defence is to say nothing at all. Good night, all. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If you like the content and you'd like to help support the channel, you can do so. In the description of every video there are some links to ways that you're able to help support the channel so I can continue putting out content. If you're unable to help us in that way, hit that subscribe button up the top there. If you haven't already, become a subscriber. That is support enough. Share the videos, comment, like, it all helps. If you're looking for something else to watch, up top there is my latest video. Down the bottom there is a video that YouTube recommends for you.